Hello, everyone, and welcome to Film Etc., the only movie review podcast you need in life. My name is Mike Webb. I'll be your host. And normally, this show that I do is that I usually do a weekly episode where I gather my thoughts on the new releases that came out in the past week and give like a 30-minute episode. But recently, I've been having a lot of stress and weight on my shoulders with life in general and whatnot. So, moving forward, and there have been a couple requests by some people that this show is going forward with an episode that's devoted to one single movie review or even up to 2 movie reviews. But if I just get more than 4, I would say it just puts too much pressure in general. So starting off with this new route of solo movie reviews is the latest film from Pixar, Turning Red, even though it's been out on Disney Plus for over a month. I have so much to say about it. But yeah, if you guys are new to this show, I basically grade movies on a number scale from 0 to 10. So let's get into my Turning Red review, shall we? Now, before we get into this review, I must cap you off with a warning. If you guys are new to the show, or if this is your first time, or if you need a little bit of refresher, I am diagnosed with autism, so you may hear my wording get jumbled up a bit. So I hope you all forgive me, and I hope you all enjoy. Turning Red is the 25th film from Pixar Animation Studios and marks the feature directorial debut of Chinese-Canadian animator, storyboard artist, and director Domee Shi, who previously made the 2018 Oscar-winning animated short film Bao, which was played before Incredibles 2. She co-wrote the screenplay for this movie with playwright Julia Cho and is a co-credited story writer with Sarah Streicher. Set in the year 2002, Turning Red is the story of Meilin Lee, voiced by newcomer Rosalie Chiang, a 13-year-old Chinese girl living in Toronto, going through the life of being a teenager. She loves hanging out with her friends, she's into boys and listens to boy bands, and she's also an honor student at her school, while at the same time she has somewhat of a close relationship with her parents, particularly with her overbearing mother Ming, voiced by Sandra Oh. That is until one day Meilin wakes up and is turned into a giant red panda whenever she lets out any strong emotion. The film also features the voice sounds of Orion Lee from First Cow, who voices Jin, Meilin's father, Ava Morse, Hyein Park, and Maitreyi Ramakrishnan as her friends Miriam, Abby, and Priya, as well as Wai Ching Ho, Tristan Alaric Chen, and the legendary James Hong. Now, for those of you who haven't seen or even heard of Domee Shi's short film Bao, which was played before Incredibles 2, it is cute, it is delightful, and it'll make you cry as well. In terms of all of Pixar's short films, for me, it's easily in the top 5 best, hands down. The short is basically about a dumpling that magically comes to life, and it just goes through this coming of age phase. It mainly focuses on this mom, and she just makes dumplings one day, and then as she bites into one, it somehow just screams, and then it just comes to life, and then she cares for it and nurtures it, and then all of a sudden the time comes where the bao just grows up, that it just becomes kind of like an adult now and just leaves family behind. And when you find out, I won't get into the last 3 minutes, and once you get the full message of the movie, it just somewhat gets this resonance among people and stuff. But anyway, Turning Red, I first heard about this project when it was announced on Disney Investor Day back in December 2020. I hear what the film is actually going to be about, and it's 13-year-old girl turns into a red panda whenever she gets too excited. From those words alone, I'm like, I'm in. I don't care what the main story is going to be. I'm already invested. Even the marketing for this movie was well put together, except when the Omicron variant happened late last year. Disney yet again decided to pull the plug on the film's theatrical release and go directly to Disney Plus. This is the third consecutive Pixar film to do so, after both Soul and Luca went that route, because their film Onward came out just as the pandemic was starting and became a huge financial disappointment, which irks me. But I can honestly say there was a part of me that was excited for this movie, Turning Red, because usually nowadays I don't anticipate for movies anymore. I mean, I used to, but then sometimes in the end result, you kind of feel disappointed. But I did have a strong feeling about this one. And you know what? It did not disappoint. This is by far the most original, bizarre, unconventional, and perhaps the most delightful movie Pixar has ever made. This movie brought me a lot of joy while watching it, and I'm glad I'm glad that Pixar has made something that's somewhat remarkable that I haven't seen since probably Inside Out. This is the first Pixar movie to be solely directed by a woman. Brenda Chapman co-directed the film Brave, and I think what Domee Shi has created is something to be adored and cherished. This is mostly based on her own childhood growing up in Canada, and like the film, she mostly focuses on her relationship between her and her mother. She's been working at Pixar She's been working at Pixar for about a decade now. And with this and her short film Bow, I think she's proven to be a Pixar grade like Pete Docter, Andrew Stanton, Brad Bird, or Lee Unkrich. All that being set aside, there are a bunch of things this movie is going for, and it pulls no punches. It breaks the fourth wall. There are quick random close-up shots of May stressing out. There are montages. Speaking of which, there are moments in the film that will make you feel stressed out and deliberately uncomfortable. Like I had this sense watching this movie and just be like, oh no, it's gonna happen. Oh, it happened. It's also very inventive of its humor. Like it's insanely funny, which I'll get to in a little bit. But it does have the usual Pixar standards, like you're gonna cry. I haven't even talked about the animation yet, which is a blend of Pixar and also Eastern animation from like the 90s to the early 2000s, especially taking inspiration from the likes of the Japanese anime shows Sailor Moon and Rama One Half. Their eyes are like wide with like the big pupils and the stars, and their mouths are not squared. They're more open and free. The voice acting is phenomenal. Rosalie Chiang, the newcomer playing the voice of May, incredible debut film, even though it's a voiceover role. Her friends are amazing as well. It's a very diverse group of friends because you not only have May, Rosalie Chang, but you also have Miriam, who's kind of like a tomboy, but also is like into skating and boys as well. All of them are into boys. But yeah, Miriam, voiced by Ava Morse. You have Priya, voiced by Maitreyi Ramakrishnan, who is Indian descent, but is also secretly goth. You see at like the beginning, she's reading like this like Twilight knockoff novel, which is kind of funny. And then you have Abby, who is this hyperactive girl, and she's Korean, and like the things she says is just like you just like can't help but chuckle or laugh because I'm that like this friend group, they're like very supportive of each other. And even when May is like going through all these stuff, they are very like they are very strong will, I would say. So yeah. And I'm terrified of Sandra Oh throughout this movie as the voice of the very protective mother, Ming. I mean, throughout this movie, you see her being overbearing and then becoming the worst mother you can possibly imagine. I mean, we probably had um, something like that in our lifetime, whether we've had like a parent or a legal guardian who is just like too close to the child itself that it doesn't like want to like take advantage of like something new and just like let things be the same. The writing's incredible too. There are little bits and pieces of dialogue that are sprinkled throughout that pay off significantly well, even up to the very last minute. It is certainly a coming of age movie that has elements you rarely see nowadays because it mainly focuses on the main character and how she's going through puberty. In fact, Domee Shi herself calls this movie the magical puberty movie. And the character. Most coming of age movies focus on the characters close to becoming more like adults. Whereas for Turning Red, it's May is just like still figuring out the stuff of what it's like being a teenager and how fun it is. But it's not the entirety of it. Although it's just the main character and her friends want to go to a concert and they all think it's their first step into becoming women. Like yeah. And the music is hip and funky and also wonderful. The original score is by Ludwig Göransson. He won an Oscar for composing Marvel's Black Panther. He also scored Creed, The Mandalorian, Christopher Nolan's Tenet. He's also going to score Christopher Nolan's next movie, Oppenheimer. The score transitions are amazing as well. Like at the very beginning, it has this like new jack swing vibe, like it's very upbeat. But then whenever May is like with her family, it's scored with like Chinese percussion instruments to make it sound more cultural sounding. Of course, I cannot do this review without mentioning the fictional boy band in this movie called Four Town, which is a riff on O Town, but they're more in line with like Backstreet Boys or NSYNC or 98 Degrees or even BTS. And they have three original songs in this movie, all of which were written by Billie Eilish and her brother Phineas O'Connell, who also voices one of the members of the group. This movie is very universal in its themes and overall message, where it mainly focuses on different generations of family, something that's very similar, not just in Pixar's Coco, but also recently in Disney's Encanto. Yet this one focuses specifically more on the the feminine side, and more specifically the relationships between mothers and daughters. And since it's also a period piece, it takes place in 2002. And for those who were born before like the year 1997, there are notable things that will make you feel a little nostalgic. And I felt that way as well. I was born in 95. And so I would have been 7 years old when this movie came around. Just like I have like this like weird like memory for something like that. You pass notes in class, CDs, all that other stuff. Yeah. The third act for this movie is not only very surprising, but also clever in its own right. As I went from being somewhat flabbergasted to almost dying of laughter to being gut wrenched. But don't worry, I'm not going to spoil anything here. As for flaws, I have very little to say, but this is probably not for young children. Probably if you're under the age of 10. I mean, you could still watch it though, but this is more skewed towards pre-adolescents and teenagers, because there are some jokes and stuff and the whole message of the film. They're just like not gonna they're like gonna be confused or something like that, but at least you can learn from it. There is a character in this movie I feel gets completely shut out throughout until that character gets one crucial scene towards the second half with the main character, but that's by choice to say the least. But I wish they had a little more to do near the first half of the movie. There's also a brief little bit midway through the film, while cute, comes out at random when you try to logistically figure it out and doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But other than that, Turning Red is perhaps one of the best Pixar movies ever made. It's certainly the best Pixar movie already in this young decade we're in the 2020s. Now, before I give my score on this movie, I also want to briefly point out that the film has been getting a little bit of a discourse slash controversy, but it mostly involves this one negative review from a critic that was published a week before the film's release. I won't say who or the outlet that person works for, but they basically say that this movie wasn't working for them and that it feels like it was specifically made for a demographic targeted audience and would rather watch movies that are suited towards them. And I for me that just like feels a little harsh. And I get the female demographic involved, but someone who is a male, I was completely surprised by it. I think it's because of like the relatability or just like the nostalgic factor that it's set in 2002. Kind of like has this like somewhat of an interesting appeal onto myself. I mean, that's just my opinion on it, but it's not just that critic, but also some people online feel that same way. If you look at the Rotten Tomatoes page, the critics gave it a very high rating. It's certified fresh at 94%, while the audience rating sits at a measly 73%, which is far below the average of what a normal audience rating earns, which usually sits in like the high 80% range to like the 90% range. Plus, there was some social media outrage over that critic's review, and yet they've since apologized. Recently, I know a relative of mine said to someone else, I'm not going to say who, but they heard a quote from the movie, even though they haven't seen the movie yet. And that quote just didn't make them feel comfortable. And it's not polarizing to say the least, but all I can say is that when I heard that, it kind of left me in tears because I'm not really like big into like uh, social gathering, I would say. But whenever I feel like I wanted to like speak up and tell everyone about a recommendation and all that stuff, I was just like, go for it. I just wanted to like let it all out there and tell them what I like. So yeah, I was a little bit upset that probably nobody else from my family, not even my parents, have seen it. But it was just myself and my two younger siblings that ended up watching it. And if I were to make a top 10 list right now of the movies that I've seen so far this year, Turning Red is surprisingly my number one, which is insane to think about. Now, look, I know all films are subjective, but hear me out on this. People have their own taste and like to form their own opinion. But what I believe is that Pixar made a movie and took very bold risks into putting it out there. They are at least broadening their horizons around different walks of life. And I say that in terms of this movie centering on a female protagonist. I mean, Pixar movies, they did have female protagonists before. If you look at Brave or Inside Out, and to some extent, Incredibles 2, but but recently Pixar has been focusing their shift onto like kids and teenagers as main characters. They did that recently with Onward and Luca, and now this. And this movie is also focusing on the cultural representation, and it's doing something other coming of age movies don't necessarily put metaphors on. And that's the beauty of Turning Red. If you don't think it's for you, just at least give it a shot and form an opinion around it. Just at least sit through the whole movie. There's even a post-credit scene at the very, very end, but I won't get into spoilers here. Because I think when people are going to look back on this years, even decades later, they're going to find something that can feel universal amongst themselves. And one more thing, I'll say is that when it was announced that it was going straight to Disney Plus and not in theaters, I was pretty upset. And I mentioned that they pulled the plug because of the Omicron variant that was surging late last year. But give me a break. When this was released, there was nothing out for families in the movie theater, unless if you had to sit through Encanto again. But they had to wait. All these families had to patiently wait an extra month until the release of Sonic the Hedgehog 2, for that matter. I saw the trailer for this movie before seeing Encanto. It would have been a whole lot fun seeing this on the big screen. In a packed house with like little kids laughing as well. I even saw the end credits and it said optimized for IMAX theaters. And I was like, this would have been cool seeing it on IMAX. It would have been fun. So, in a possible future, and Disney, I hope you're listening, I would love to see this movie get a theatrical release nationwide. Even if it's a one night only Fathom Events thing, I would do it. I would even wait years and even take my kids to this movie, even if I have any. But enough ranting for me. But Turning Red, I mentioned, is not only the best movie I've seen so far this year, I think it's Pixar's best movie since either Inside Out or Coco. So yeah. Turning Red is now streaming on Disney Plus. It is for sure going to get a physical release sometime this year, and I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. Anyway, guys, that's going to do it with my review of Turning Red. Have you seen Turning Red? Did you like it? Do you think it's one of Pixar's best? Or did you think it's like B-level Pixar? Also, were you upset that this went straight to Disney Plus and not theatrical and wished you could have seen it on the big screen like I was? Let me know your thoughts down below. I'm at social media at Real Mike Webb on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. You can also follow the show at FilmETCcast on Instagram. You can also leave a 5-star review on our Apple Podcast page. Spread the word of mouth. Share if you must. You can also stream the show on the many places that we stream, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, you name it. And I will be back with more reviews coming soon, including Everything Everywhere All at Once, starring Michelle Yeoh, Petite Maman, which is a French film, which I cannot wait to talk to you guys about, as well as The Batman, which is coming out on HBO Max really, really soon. So I'll have an audio review for that. Until then, stay safe, and until next time, I will see you all at the cinema. Thank you.